It was 1967, and the king of rock and roll was about to face his greatest challenge, yet not on stage, but in the privacy of Graceland's master bedroom. When Priscilla Presley whispered those life-altering words, "Elvis, I'm pregnant," the man who had conquered the world with his voice fell silent. What happened next would forever change the course of their tumultuous marriage, revealing a side of Elvis that fans never knew existed. This is the untold story of how two words transformed the king into a father and nearly broke apart the empire he'd built around his carefully constructed image. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Graceland's master bedroom as Priscilla Presley sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling slightly as she held the small piece of paper that would change everything. The doctor's confirmation was still fresh in her mind, and the weight of the secret she now carried felt heavier than any burden she'd ever known. Elvis was downstairs, probably already surrounded by his usual entourage, the Memphis Mafia, as they were known, planning another recording session or discussing upcoming performances. At 32, he was at the height of his career, his every move scrutinized by millions of fans who saw him as the eternal bachelor, the untouchable king of rock and roll. The carefully crafted image of Elvis as the ultimate heartthrob was worth millions, and everyone in his inner circle knew it. Priscilla, barely 22, had been living in this fishbowl existence since she was a teenager. Their relationship, which began when she was just 14 and he was 24, had always been unconventional. Now, 7 years later and married for barely a year, she was about to drop a bombshell that would test everything they'd built together. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, in the most famous house in Memphis, surrounded by luxury that most people could only dream of, yet she felt completely alone. The gold records lining the walls, the custom-made furniture, the fleet of Cadillacs in the driveway, none of it mattered in this moment. She was just a young woman, scared and uncertain, about to tell her husband that their lives were about to change forever. As she made her way downstairs, the familiar sounds of Graceland filled the air. Somewhere, a guitar was being strummed. Voices carried from the kitchen where the cook was preparing lunch. The TV was on in the living room, probably tuned to one of Elvis's favorite shows. It was a typical day in the Presley household, but Priscilla knew that, in a few minutes, nothing would ever be typical again. She found Elvis in his office, hunched over contracts and correspondence. His hair was perfectly styled, despite the early hour, and he was wearing one of his signature jumpsuits. When he looked up and saw her expression, his famous smile faded. He could read her like a book, and right now, the pages were filled with anxiety and anticipation. "What's wrong, baby?" Elvis asked, immediately pushing aside the stack of papers and giving Priscilla his full attention. His voice carried that gentle Memphis drawl that had charmed millions, but now it was laced with concern. He'd seen that look on her face before, usually when something was seriously troubling her. Priscilla took a deep breath, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She'd rehearsed this moment 12 times in her head, but now that it was here, all her carefully planned words seemed to evaporate. "Elvis, I need to tell you something important," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood up immediately, his 6-foot frame towering over her as he reached out to take her hands. "You're scaring me, Scylla. What is it?" The concern in his blue eyes was genuine, and for a moment she saw past the superstar facade to the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a sacred secret. For what felt like an eternity, Elvis said nothing. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something she couldn't quite read. The silence stretched on, and Priscilla felt her anxiety building. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had expected. Then, without warning, Elvis let out a whoop of joy that could probably be heard throughout Graceland. He swept Priscilla up in his arms, spinning her around the room as his face broke into the biggest smile she'd seen in months. "A baby. We're having a baby," he exclaimed, his voice filled with pure, unfiltered excitement. But as quickly as the joy had appeared, it began to fade. She could see the wheels turning in his mind as the reality of the situation began to sink in. A baby meant responsibility. A baby meant changes to his lifestyle, his career, his carefully maintained image. A baby meant that the eternal bachelor would officially become a family man, and not everyone would be happy about that. The transformation was subtle, but noticeable. His grip on her loosened slightly, and when he set her down, his eyes had taken on that distant quality she'd come to recognize when he was processing something significant. The initial euphoria was being replaced by something more complex, a mixture of excitement, fear, and calculation that would define his approach to fatherhood from that moment forward. The days following Priscilla's announcement were a whirlwind of secret meetings and hushed conversations behind the closed doors of Graceland. Colonel Parker, Elvis's legendary manager, was among the first to be informed, and his reaction was exactly what Priscilla had feared. The colonel saw everything through the lens of profit and publicity, and a pregnant wife didn't fit neatly into the image they'd spent years crafting. "This changes things," the colonel had said during a tense meeting in Elvis's study. "The fans, they see you as available, as theirs. A baby makes you domestic." He'd spoken the word like it was a disease, something to be managed rather than celebrated. Elvis found himself caught between two worlds. On one hand, the prospect of becoming a father filled him with a pride and excitement he'd never experienced. He'd always been close to his own mother, Gladys, and the idea of having a child to love and protect appealed to something deep within his soul. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the business implications of this development. The Memphis Mafia, his loyal group of friends and employees, were divided in their reactions. Some were genuinely happy for him, slapping him on the back and congratulating him on the news. Others seemed worried about how this would affect their own positions. In his inner circle, for years, they'd enjoyed unprecedented access to one of the world's biggest celebrities. But a baby would inevitably change the dynamics of their relationships. Priscilla watched all of this unfold with growing unease. She'd hoped that the announcement would bring her and Elvis closer together, but instead, it seemed to be creating new tensions and complications. She began to spend more time alone, reading books about pregnancy and preparing for motherhood, while Elvis dealt with the business side of their expanding family. The media attention was another concern, though they'd managed to keep the pregnancy secret for now. They knew it wouldn't be long before the press caught wind of the news. Elvis's every move was scrutinized by photographers and reporters, and Priscilla's changing figure would soon make their secret impossible to hide. During quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, Elvis would place his hand on her still flat stomach and talk about their future child with wonder and anticipation. These were the moments when Priscilla felt most connected to him, when she could see past all the complications and remember why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. But these intimate moments were becoming increasingly rare as the demands of managing this new reality consumed more and more of their time and energy. As Priscilla's pregnancy progressed, the changes in their marriage became impossible to ignore. Elvis, who had always been protective of her, became almost obsessively so. He hired additional security, limited her public appearances, and began treating her as if she were made of glass. While his intentions were loving, the effect was suffocating. The man who had once encouraged her independence now seemed determined to wrap her in cotton wool. Simple activities like shopping or visiting friends became major productions requiring security escorts and careful planning. Priscilla began to feel more like a precious artifact than a wife, something could be protected and preserved rather than loved and cherished. Elvis's own behavior became increasingly erratic during this period. The pressure of maintaining his career while preparing for fatherhood took its toll. His insomnia, always a problem, became worse. He would spend hours pacing Graceland's halls at night, his mind racing with thoughts about the future. The prescription medications that had once helped him manage the demands of his career became more frequent companions. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and plans for the future, now often centered around logistics and security concerns. How would they handle the media attention? What would happen to his touring schedule? How could they protect their child from the intense scrutiny that came with being Elvis Presley's offspring? Despite these challenges, there were moments of pure magic. Elvis would sing to Priscilla's growing belly, his voice soft and tender as he performed impromptu lullabies that no audience would ever hear. He became fascinated with every aspect of her pregnancy, reading books about child development and asking endless questions about what she was experiencing. The birth of Lisa Marie in February 1968 was a moment of pure joy that temporarily pushed aside all their concerns. Elvis wept when he held his daughter for the first time, and for a brief period it seemed like everything might work out perfectly. But the challenges that had emerged during the pregnancy didn't disappear with the birth. They evolved and intensified. The reality of being parents while maintaining Elvis's career created strains that neither of them had fully anticipated. The man who had once lived for the thrill of performing now had to balance that passion with the responsibilities of fatherhood. And it was a balance he would struggle to maintain for the rest of their marriage. The moment Priscilla told Elvis she was pregnant marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with both incredible joy and unexpected challenges. While their marriage would eventually end in divorce in 1973, that pregnancy announcement revealed depths of love, fear, and complexity that defined their relationship for years to come. Lisa Marie became the light of Elvis's life, but the pressures that emerged during Priscilla's pregnancy foreshadowed many of the issues that would ultimately drive them apart. The king of rock and roll discovered that some crowns are harder to balance than others. Ready to discover more untold stories from the world of music legends? Subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive behind-the-scenes content and never-before-revealed moments that shaped history's greatest stars.